today. I'd like now to pass this over to Chief Tony Alexis, who will be sharing a statement.
Good afternoon.
Recording in progress.
My name is Chief Tony Alexis of the Alexis Nakota Sioux Nation. On behalf of the Treaty 6 Chiefs, we are in unanimous agreement that the Alberta Sovereignty Bill is unconstitutional and illegal. We are all treaty people, every one of us. We must uphold treaty. It's an international agreement and the highest law to govern the land, resources, our peoples, and we have never ceded this territory, nor do we ever plan to. We support our colleagues and relatives at the Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations who spoke out earlier this month about the Saskatchewan Act. We will not stand by quietly and allow colonial governing structures and people to ignore our inherent rights as treaty people. This bill sets up the province to allow extraction to happen at any rate completely unprotected. The fight for our rights to land and resources seems to never end, and we must move forward towards a more sustainable future. It pains me as chief of my nation, Alexis Nakota Sioux, and as a Treaty 6 person, to know how long we have fought for our rights and to be recognized and honored as sovereign people. As the first people of these lands, we have fought to govern ourselves for the right to refuse enforcement of any federal or provincial law or policy that violates our jurisdictional rights. Yet we are continually ignored and not acknowledged by federal, provincial, and municipal governments in the way we deserve. And now the Premier of Alberta, Danielle Smith, is seeking to provoke the majority of Albertans, First Nations, and other Indigenous peoples to appease a small minority of Albertans who are unhappy with the Liberal government. We will not back down from this. In fact, we will be doing everything we can to educate and create awareness amongst our peoples, the Albertans, to understand the devastating impacts the Alberta Sovereignty Bill will have. Thank you. Ishnish.
Thank you, Chief Tony. I'd like now to introduce Chief Darcy Dixon to share a statement.
Good afternoon. My name's Chief Darcy Dixon of the Bearspaw Nation, which is located in the Treaty 7 territory. Thank you for being here today. Time and time again, we are shown by politicians and political parties in this country, now known as Canada, that Indigenous peoples are not a priority, nor are we even considered in their planning, policy making, and legislation. We should have been the first stop for this discussion as stewards of these lands, as treaties people. Treaty 7 views the Alberta Sovereignty Act as completely unethical. First Nation peoples are the original people who have been seeking sovereignty for centuries. Our rights must be honored. We feel our rights have to come first instead of pursuing efforts to further divide Indigenous peoples and Albertans. There is a false assumption that the province or other entities have rights on our land and territories. While we don't need legal academics to tell us, we are hearing them loud and clear across this country that this idea would clearly be in conflict with Canada's Constitution and our treaty arrangements. It is fundamentally unlawful and undemocratic. Non-Indigenous people living in Alberta should be distressed and beyond concerned with this bill. We need to come together to support this move from the Alberta government. We have more in common as a people than we do differences, and I hope we can work together to ensure this act never comes to fruition. This is a far cry from sovereignty. It is nothing but a dangerous and damaging plan to undermine democracy and abandon the rule of law. Thank you. Shnish.
Thank you, Chief Dixon. I'd like to now introduce Grand Chief Arthur Noski.
Thank you. I wanted to read the release. Unceded Treaty 6 Territory, November 18, 2022. The Treaty Chiefs are united in opposition to any claims being made over our peoples, lands, and territories. We take offense to Danielle Smith's forthcoming Alberta Sovereignty Act and outright reject it. Danielle Smith's mandate letter to Justice Minister Tyler Sandro directs him to draft a sovereignty bill in response to the, quote, unconstitutional federal encroachment on provincial jurisdiction, end quote. The mandate letter is based on the false assumption that the province has title to our lands and territories. Smith's proposed bill undermines the authority and the duty of the sovereign nations that entered into treaty. How can the province make a sovereignty bill when our treaties were made before the creation of Alberta? Our treaties with the Crown are peace and friendship treaties. We did not cede any of our lands and territories. Danielle Smith's ploy to implement her free prior Alberta strategy undermines our rights already protected in their Constitution. Our treaties were made with the Crown and our international agreements. Our primary responsibility is to uphold our treaties for the future generations. If Danielle Smith and her UCP government want to erect invisible firewalls around Alberta, they can attempt to do so, but our territories will stay intact because we have not given our free, prior, and informed consent. Further, if industry and government want to do business in our territories, they should come directly to the chiefs of the treaty nations who have jurisdiction and authority over all lands and resources. And to add to that, Treaty 8's position, what are our options to Danielle Smith's Sovereignty Act? Canada would not exist without treaties. These provincial and territories are a creation of Canada. The Crown requested of our nations to enter into treaties to allow the Crown subjects and settlers to live in peace and friendship with our territories. The specific purpose of the strategy to implement the treaty is to share equitable and in the spirit of intent of treaties and the benefits of the natural resources and our homelands. We cannot have a strategy to go forward if Alberta moves forward with legislation to declare sovereignty in our territories. It will lead to conflict in the future. We cannot break the treaties. Alberta did not exist at the time of the treaty making. 5, there was never any discussion that the Crown with our treaties would be subject to their laws and legislation. There was never any discussion that the Crown's assumed jurisdiction would be created in our territories. We never gave our consent to the creation of Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba, or any of the provinces and territories that cross over our treaty territories. Nor did we consent to the 1930s Natural Resource Transfer Act, which is an illegal act. We are a sovereign people. That is why there is a treaty. Treaties are living documents. 2012, Canada had been asked, how did they obtain title? To date, there has been no response. Treaties 1 to 11 encompass 65% of what you know as Canada, so it is crucial that both levels of government work with First Nations going forward before any political body starts drafting anything to do with their constitution. As the First Peoples, we are the sovereign nations and the landowners. The basis of our treaties were to share lands with the settlers with the promise that all resources would be held in trust. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Noski. We're going to be taking questions in person first, so I'd like to have one question per outlet, and then we'll move to online. So I'll open it up to anyone who has a question. I think you might need to come up here.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for taking our questions. François Gély from Radio Canada. So I would just like one of you, if you could try to maybe flesh out, do you have a concrete example of what a violation of your rights would look like? I know we don't have the text of the Sovereignty Act, and there's a lot of unknown around all of this, but beyond, and I'm not to diminish the principle, but do you have an example of what an infringement would look like? What are you afraid of precisely?
I think if I can answer it, you don't have to go far to question the violations of treaty. Under Treaty 8, the top item in the treaty agreement was education. You have, for the last 3 years, the reports on the Indian residential school strategies, attempts at genocide. That is a total violation of treaty. And in relation to the land and resources, provincial violation today is they look at First Nations communities as federal jurisdiction because of the treaties. They exploit all the resources everywhere and anywhere, and then everything from services in relation to the exploitation of those resources stop at the reserve boundary. That is another direct violation. So that's my response. I'm not sure if the other chiefs have responses to it.
Thank you, Grand Chief. I'll just add a comment too. When we talk about treaty is about land. So right from the beginning, it's always been about land. And one of the first things that happened immediately was we were cut out. We were put into a reserve situation that was done through an Indian Act. But we've never gave up the right to utilize the land. It was the idea at the beginning was that we would share it to the depth of a plow, that we would share the wealth and the resources of this land, but that has not happened. As you know, that our people have been living in poverty. We were forced onto reserves, and that is a violation of what the treaty is all about. And still to this day, the idea in every policy or bill or the government, everything that they're doing, especially this bill right now we're talking about, is a violation of that treaty. It's about the land. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Sean Amato with CTV News here in Edmonton. Thanks for having us today. I wanted to ask a related question about our Premier. For years, Danielle Smith has claimed that she has Indigenous heritage. There's more. And even recently, she's claimed that she is a person of mixed ancestry. APTN recently did an investigation and found that that's probably not true. Today, we asked the Premier for a statement on that. She would neither confirm nor deny whether she has Indigenous heritage. She said that she hasn't done a deep dive, and it sounds like she doesn't really know, but she has made these claims in the past. So I'm wondering what the reaction to that is in this room, and if that is in some ways offensive to the people in this room, that somebody would make that claim and either it's not true or she doesn't know. Thank you.
I think if I can, I think they should go to the Pink Palace here, the Canada office. They're the ones that have that category of which bloodline you are, and maybe if she can find herself there, maybe that they will believe.
So a lot of times, you know, being a person of this land was really tough on the people from this land. And we've defended that, we've protected that, and we've always maintained, you know, we were people of the land all the time. And then after some time, as we start to grow, as we start to fight in court, we learn about the institution of law, of governance, of, you know, all the institutions are starting to become these masters. What we're realizing is that anybody wants to be a part of that Indigenous community if there's a benefit. You know, at the university level, we have people who are not Indigenous who claim that they are Indigenous to gain benefits, to gain bursaries, and so on. There's always something behind it. And to only just show up right now to say that they're Indigenous, and if to recognize that a true Indigenous person would not go against all the treaty people of this land.
Hi all, I'm Katarina Schultz with CBC. I'm just curious what kind of consultation there's been between you all and the Premier and even the provincial government about the Sovereignty Act, and also what actions you plan on taking if the Sovereignty Act is put into place and perhaps moves forward.
Yeah, I think this new act is an evolving act, and the main opposition, I believe, is that our rights must be honored, and we feel that our rights should come first instead of pursuing efforts to divide First Nations people in Alberta here and Albertans. How do we do that? Well, we have academics, we have our own people, and we will be looking for them to see what course of action we take. But as I mentioned earlier, this act is being announced, and the chiefs are prepared to deal with this act with whatever means that is necessary, not just for the chiefs in our communities and here in Alberta, but for all of Albertans. Thank you.
As leaders, we have a responsibility to our people. And the Premier also has a responsibility not only to her party, but all the Albertans. And consultation for us, there has been zero consultation. And so in short, there's been no consultation. And for her responsibility to carry, for her to have a leadership role like that is an honor, to stand for people. And if she's going to do anything for the people, it can't be done without the people, and that's what's happening right now. Thank you.
So I guess my response would be, I guess in relation to, the settlers and the expansion basically of where Canada is and the provinces, that the one thing that, governments don't talk about is the fact that, these won't exist without the treaties. And the treaty territories are an agreement between the sovereign peoples of this land to, allow settlement, and that there'd be no hindrance of the people that are coming in. So that, in a way, she is a treaty person, because she's on the other side of what the treaty agreement was. So if there is anyone that look at a sovereignty act going forward, I think that authority in relation to the treaty areas here now are with those nations that are in that treaty territories. If there's any discussion that I would like to get involved in about a sovereignty act, it would be based on Treaty Number 8, not on a provincial government. Thank you.
I want to say something on that. I'm from Treaty 7. We entered into treaty with the Imperial Crown. We did not enter into treaty with another group of people, another sovereign. We never did that. And in our treaty, we agreed for the Crown's subjects to use some of our territories. We're to live side by side without interference. Both the feds and the province have always interfered in our lives. That has been wrong, and we've been trying to correct this since the making of our treaties. Our peoples have suffered. Now, Premier Smith wants to do a Sovereignty Act. While we certainly didn't enter into treaty with her own, under her own entity, whatever she may be. If Canada is going to disagree amongst themselves, let them sort out those problems. Don't use our territories. to your advantage to try and not go by some federal laws. We have to look at that Sovereignty Act once it's done, and we're going to take a thorough look at it, and we will see how it infringes on our treaties. We're to live side by side without interference, and we agreed to let the newcomers to our territories. So let's respect one another, and let's take care of all our own citizens and our relationships with the provincial government or the federal government or anybody else, the municipalities. But we are nations. The treaty trumps Canadian law. It trumps provincial law. It trumps federal law. So let's leave it at that. And it's time the Canadians understood the true history of our treaties. Thank you.
Could we just get your names with full spelling, please?
Regina Crowchild from Consultation Nation. Treaty 7.
We have time for about 2 more questions in person. If there was any more in person, just before I go to you. Anyone else? No? Okay.
I just wanted to know what are your thoughts, because we, on the press release, you mentioned the broader agenda, not just the Sovereignty Act. What are your thoughts on a provincial police to replace the RCMP? Is that something you worry about, or?
I can, I guess in relation to the provincial police, I've been at those Zoom meetings and stressing the disapproval of the process of the provincial police. And in stating that, I don't have to go far in identifying why. You see the RCMP treatment of one of our chiefs, and you see the history and the abuses of our people. And not only that, the sheriffs basically are, an enforcement group that don't consider anything. It's as if, if they have to confiscate your last piece of survival, a drink of water or meat, they'll take it. That's how harsh they are. And the SRD officers amongst our people are the same way. And now they're a part of that system. So to us, it's come to a point of a very racial front on our people. And at the treaty making, the Crown's representatives were there stating that these redcoats are there to protect you. I guess if you go to all the news and the videos out there that were caught, were they protecting us? So I don't think you have to go far to draw your own conclusions. And there's a lot of talk about reconciliation. They say it, federal government says it, provincial government says it, but where's the action? I think when it comes down to reconciliation, I think that those laws that they have currently, that they should be revisited, but more so recognize the jurisdiction and authority that we have as sovereign peoples of treaty. Then we'll be talking reconciliation. But making laws, legislation, or even quote, the Sovereignty Act, end quote, there's no consultation, like somebody said. I know that Danielle, when she was elected, she tried calling me. I tried calling her. There's just phone tag, text messaging, but it didn't develop into anything. So in saying that, as the first peoples of this country, and with the people, the treaty partners, the non-treaty people in our territories, this is a governmental issue based on the laws and legislation. If reconciliation is going to happen, it has to be noted as a drastic change in the party platforms, and you that elect you, the people, the public that elect these representatives provincially and federally, I think you should seriously consider who and how you vote. Look at the platforms. Are they serious about reconciliation? Because if they are, then those party platforms will change. Thank you.
Just a quick comment on that as well. Regarding provincial policing, we think, my observation just coming from my own community is that the consultation that has been done has been very weak. Again, another poor approach of the government moving forward with their strategy. Like I said, the communication has been weak, and they haven't prepared to really move forward properly. From what we understand, the provincial policing, if they were going to change, it's going to be a $1 billion cost to the province of Alberta. So the community, the general public of Alberta should recognize, to see that too. And at the same time, the police who are there, they would have to move into provincial policing. I believe it impacts their pension plans as well, or even at the larger scale with the Sovereignty Act is going to impact a lot of people. When you think about what the government is doing right now, it's very evident that they have not reached the people of Alberta, and for sure not the First Nations in Alberta. Thank you.
In Treaty 7, we retain the right to maintain law and order amongst ourselves and others. That's what we agreed to. And like I said, we agreed not to interfere in each other's issues. Again, the province has an issue with a federal mandate. They should correct it. However, like the chief said, and the RCMP who were referred to as the Redcoats, were to ensure that the treaty was fulfilled according to its spirit and intent. But this has never happened. Many of our First Nations have the RCMP, many of them have that, and there's a lot of our people are in jail. A lot of people are in institutions. We don't have a fair trial in the justice systems. So, rightfully, I guess we can say we support the RCMP because they were part of our treaty making, but they have to do their job properly. And they need to talk to our people. So, the best of luck to you, Albertans. Thank you.
We're going to go to our first online question. It's from the Canadian Press, Bob Weber. He's asking in regards to the Alberta Sovereignty Bill, if you're going to take it to court.
I think personally, because the Lieutenant Governor is part of the Crown that we entered into treaty with, I think she can stop it before it ascends anywhere else.
Okay, thank you. We have another question online. Audrey from CBC French.
Hi, thank you for taking questions. Very appreciated. I contacted the Alberta government regarding your opposition and your concerns to the Alberta Sovereignty Act and responded to very shortly ago that, oh, sorry, I'm hearing myself back. It's a little difficult. They said that they are committed to ensuring the legislation specifically states nothing within the act is to be construed as abrogating or derogating from any existing Aboriginal and treaty rights of the Aboriginal peoples of Canada that are recognized and affirmed by Section 35 of the Constitutional Act of 1982. And additionally, she says the Premier will reach out to the chiefs of Treaty 6, 7, and 8 to book in-person meeting for the purposes of direct discussions on this issue. I'd like to know what's your reaction to this.
Yeah, a little bit, yeah. I think, again, it's one of those situations where, as First Nations here in Alberta, we continuously try to play catch-up on any of the new legislation that seemed to be coming down the pipe. And if Alberta was truly our partners, then we would have been the first peoples, Treaty 6, 7, and 8, that they should have came to consult with. So whether we take it to court or not, like I mentioned earlier, that's still up for discussion. But I think the provincial government has a chance to try to truly build a relationship, not just with Treaty 6, 7, or 8, but with all Albertans, to come to the table and discuss this further. Thank you.
So if I may too, I'd like to point out to the fact that, yes, I know that there's a possibility of the Section 35 of the Constitution being addressed, but it's not addressing the fact that even though it's constitutionally protected, our way of life prior to entering into treaty, the hunting, the fishing, trapping, the forests were there for our shelter, everything that this country, this land provided. And in the provincial legislation, hunting, fishing, trapping is considered recreation. So having that quote in there doesn't carry any weight for us. And when you go to Section 35, a lot of times people quote Section 35. Section 25 solidifies treaty, that they cannot decide or rule on anything in relation to the treaties. So there is a protection clause there in its Section 25. So, but I'll go back to just this point. The sports side of our treaty rights with the provincial government, they have catch and release with one of our more vitals, food source, the fish. Sometimes I question, go into these farmers, and I'm not attacking farmers, ranchers. How would they feel if I got on a horse and ran into their pasture and roped these cows and released them, or rope another one and release them? I'll probably get shot, but those are the legislation and the position that the province has on First Nations. They're not considerate of our way of life and what we hold dear as a sovereign people.
And if I may ask a follow-up question, what would you like to see the Premier do? What would you like, for example, her to withhold that bill, consult with you, and maybe present it at another time after you come to agreement on what you'd like to see in that bill?
For me, the Premier, I guess, doesn't understand her history, that these treaty territories are intact. And I believe she should go back to her history, but also maybe more so prove her status. No, I'm just kidding. Sorry.
Okay, we have one more. Oh, is there more?
Chief Noski,
Yep.
I interject some questions here.
Yeah, go ahead, Chief Adam.
When it comes to relational treaty and the understanding of where we're at here today, Premier Smith coming into the position of the Premier of Alberta with only 8 months in her term and start talking about separation. It tells me that this was her plan ever since she was probably the leader of the Red Rose, or Wild Rose of Alberta. let's not consider about what's going on with this convoy that keeps on going to Ottawa from Alberta. And what movement was that? That wasn't a movement about truckers and everything. That was the movement of the white supremacy. And it's continuing to go on, and Albertans and people from Saskatchewan and BC and Manitoba are, what do you call being led down this path without being told the truth behind this whole push, which is to separate from Canada. You know, and I find that very alarming that the premier will start talking about this within her month of being elected the Premier of Alberta. That's my thoughts.
Okay, we will be ending the press conference now, so thank you very much for attending.
Okay.